President kicking off his second year in office with a nearly 2-hour press conference yesterday, quite a marathon. The president defending his record despite his major agenda items repeatedly falling short in Congress. Here to talk about it is White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Great to have you, and we have so much to cover with you. I want to start with the voting rules.
Good morning to you, Jen. By the way, it's hard to find two Bengal fans in the same room.
That's right.
And we've done it.
Can I join the party?
Big game this weekend. Big game on Saturday. Go Bengals.
We'll be all playing that. And hopefully there will be no breaking news that you have to deal with, Jen, during the Bengals game. We will try to protect you from that.
Thanks for being here.
Let's start with voting rules. You just tweeted this. I want to put it up here. It says, let's be clear that the president was not casting doubt on the legitimacy of the 2022 election. He was making the opposite point in 2020. A record number of voters turned out in the face of a pandemic, and election officials made sure they could vote and have those votes counted. But here's what the president said yesterday afternoon.
Well, it all depends on whether or not we're able to make the case to the American people that some of this is being set up to try to alter the outcome of the election. The increase in the prospect of being illegitimate is in direct proportion to us not being able to get these reforms passed.
Last night, on the eve of his anniversary in office, those reforms failed. So I'm curious if he will continue to say that those 2022 elections will be illegitimate.
Well, first, I've talked to the president a lot about this, and he absolutely is not predicting that the 2022 elections would be illegitimate. The point he was raising was both that in 2020, even amongst challenging circumstances, efforts to suppress the vote, and the midst of a pandemic, there was record turnout. Democrats and Republicans, record turnout to go to the polls. And the point he was making is that the former president asked a number of states, 7 or more in fact, to overturn the outcome of the election. Now, obviously, if there's an effort to do that, we've got to fight against that. That's what our commitment is to doing. But he was not making a prediction. He has confidence in the American people, and we're going to do everything we can to protect people's rights.
He mentioned the minority vote. I mean, he was pretty brash about it. And you're right. We had the largest turnout we've seen on a percentage basis in 120 years. And states are changing their own laws as we speak. Joe Biden's lived in Delaware for 70 years, and they're going to have early voting for the first time this coming November in 22.
And, Bill, it should be a baseline. Everybody should have access to early voting. You know, if you're a parent of 2 kids or 3 kids, I have 2, some people have 3, 4 or more, it is challenging. You should have more places you can drop off your ballot. You should have more places you can early vote. That should be a baseline everywhere across the country. And as it relates to the minority vote, we know that voter suppression impacts minority communities the most. Part of what the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is trying to do is make it harder for states that have a history of that to change their laws to make it even more difficult. They have to get approval from the Department of Justice. We think that's entirely reasonable. And I will say that a lot of Republicans in the past, 16 who are still in the Senate today, have supported the protection of voting rights in the past. So his question is, why wouldn't this be a bipartisan effort?
All right. Well, this issue will certainly continue. You know, in addition, here in New York, the city council just passed a bill saying that non-citizens can vote, even if they just got here 30 days ago. So, I mean, the question about legitimacy of elections, does that go both ways, right? I mean, we're going to have a lot of talk about that. But I also want to ask you about COVID. We're about 6 weeks behind Europe when it comes to these variants that are coming through. That was true with Delta. It's true with Omicron. Yesterday, Europe made some very interesting decisions. Boris Johnson in the UK rolling back mask mandates and vaccine passports. Israel saying we're not going to make everyone get a booster every 3 months. You had Spain doing something similar on vaccine passports, even the Czech Republic. So the president seems to be going in a different direction, right? You're sending out masks now. You're going to do the test. But can you envision, will the president provide America an off-ramp to COVID, and especially for those, the unvaccinated? Because the more we find out, like from the CDC saying that you are more protected if you already had the virus, even if you are unvaccinated. That just came out. So I'm looking for a question or an answer on an off-ramp for Americans, because a lot of unvaccinated feel like they're being the scapegoats and second-class citizens, even though I want people to be vaccinated so that they're protected.
Sure. Well, first let me say 75% of the country is fully vaccinated. All of those people did not vote for Joe Biden, and certainly they're not all Democrats. We know that mathematically. What the president's trying to do is protect the country, protect people from death. We also know from the CDC and from our scientists that you are 17 times more likely to be hospitalized and 20 times more likely to die if you are not vaccinated. So we're trying to provide people accurate information. At the same time, Dan, I think you make a really important point. We don't want to live like this. You heard the president say, we don't want to live like this forever. We want to get back to a point where we're not wearing masks, of course, where we're not worried about our kids being in school places, where we can go and cheer for the Bengals. That one's for you, Bill, out in football stadiums. That's where we want to get to. And what we're trying to do is continue to fight at the height of a pandemic to get to that point. That's our objective.
So are we about 6 weeks away from something like a Boris Johnson announcement saying that masks will no longer be required?
Maybe less.
Well, I can't make a prediction of that because we listen to the scientists. Obviously, we've seen it spike in some parts of the world. We're seeing it spike. We've seen spikes and come down a little bit in some parts of the United States, but we'll be watching it very closely.
Okay, on the border now, it did not come up yesterday. Yet in 2021, we believe there were 2 million encounters at the southern border, just blowing away all kinds of records. There does not seem to be much of a suggestion that the policy is going to change. Should we expect 2 million more encounters in the year 2022 now?
Well, I'm surprised, Bill, as well, because it was a nearly 2-hour press conference and people asked whatever they wanted, including some crazy questions in there. But I will say, Bill, what the president's view is that we need to do more. We need to fix our broken immigration system. That means smarter security at the border. It also means a more moral approach to how we're treating people when they come across the border. Now, some of those confrontations at the border mean we still have issues in these countries that have been going on for a long time. This is why we see surges every couple of years, where people have challenging economic circumstances, and we haven't done enough to address the root causes. That's part of what we're focused on as well, but we need to address this from many fronts.
You've got criminals who are being arrested at the border on a weekly basis. And you're well aware of that. All right, on to crime. Dana, go ahead.
Well, that was just another issue that didn't come up last night, but it is starting to show up in the top 5 issues that voters say that they're concerned about. And you can also look at the polls that say that a majority of people feel that the president is not focused on the issues that they care about. So on crime, will the president find a way back to where he was when he supported the crime bill? I mean, people are concerned about the murder rate, but also assaults, burglary. Everything seems like it's on edge. And you can't think about anything else like free community college or universal pre-K if you're worried about your security.
Well, absolutely, the president would agree with you on that front. And we have also encouraged local leaders, local officials to take on the crime in their communities. That's absolutely essential. What the president has proposed, and we'll get to, there'll be a lot of discussion of this, I expect, over the next couple of months, is a significant plus up of funding for local community policing programs, significantly increased from the last president,
but Jen,
because the president's a believer in that.
Will he push on the progressive prosecutors that are, for example, here in New York City, saying that things like taking a gun into a store, robbing it, but then leaving and nobody gets killed, that's a misdemeanor? Is the president okay with that?
Well, look, the president's not going to wade into the actions of prosecutors or of the legal justice department. That's his bottom line. But he's also been very clear. He's been a longtime supporter of cops programs, of the police, of local first responders, of local law enforcement, and he has been an advocate for additional funding.
Okay.
As you know, it was a big issue of defunding the police. That was absolutely never anything he proposed or supported, even in the face of real criticism from within his own party.
Okay, 2 more topics here on Russia. What would the White House consider to be a, quote, minor incursion?
Well, let me be very clear on what the president has conveyed directly to President Putin. If there is any movement of military troops across the border into Ukraine, if they go into Ukraine and invade, that is an invasion. There will be severe economic consequences. It is also true, and Bill, I was at the State Department, and Dana, I was at the State Department back in 2014. We saw some of this back then. There's a range of tactics the Russians use, whether it's the little green men, as they're called, or it's cyber attacks, and we will be prepared to respond to that as well. So we're prepared for a range of tactics they may use, but if they move their military into Ukraine, we will be responding, and we have a range of preparations.
As you
for that.
know, from overnight, Kiev was, I think the word was shocked by some of their leading diplomats when they heard that comment. Has there been a direct communication with Kiev today since that comment last night about a minor incursion?
Our national security team has been in touch. Tony Blinken is in Europe right now. Also, I would note the foreign minister conveyed just this morning that he is confident in the support of the United States, and he should be, because we are supportive and we have their backs.
Back here now, he said and a lot of this was framed in the last 12 months, coming up on 1 year in office. He said he outperformed in his first year. What would progressive lawmakers say to that comment?
You'll have to have them on your channel and ask them. But I would say, Bill, what he was referring to is the fact that no one thought he would get a bipartisan infrastructure bill across the finish line. And as you know, he did that with the support of 19 senators and 6 members of the House. No one thought that we would make as much progress on COVID as we did. Are we still in the midst of the fight? Absolutely. But 210 million people, 75% of the country is vaccinated. That's progress we can build on. As Dana knows well, and you know well from covering White Houses, you don't pack up your bags after 1 year. You keep working on it. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So that was the point he was making.
I just want to backtrack a moment here, because we're doing this interview in real time. And in real time, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, just sent out this tweet. I want to read it to you. I know you haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen it yet. We'll read it
I haven't seen it yet.
So we want to remind the great powers that there are no minor incursions and small nations, just as there are no minor casualties and little grief from the loss of loved ones. I say this as the president of a great power. End tweet. Your reaction to that?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Sure. Let me be very clear. The president has conveyed directly to President Putin, if there is the movement of any military troops across the border, that is an invasion. If they go in, that is an invasion, and there will be severe economic consequences. I know President Zelensky knows that. We've conveyed that. It is also true, as President Zelensky has experienced, that there are a range of tactics the Russians use. We've been warning about some of those steps, including the spreading of misinformation out there, which has been was widespread in 2014, the use of cyber tools, and we're also going to be ready to respond to that as well, and we'll be working in lockstep with the Ukrainians.
Jen, certainly other adversaries of the United States watch everything that the president says and that you say. So yesterday, when the president said that about minor incursion, you can imagine that everyone in Beijing was thinking, when it comes to Taiwan. And I wonder about that message, right, how it will spread even further. But also curious about the Olympics. Does the president have any concern about the well-being and safety of American athletes as they head to China in this very tumultuous time?
If he did, we would work with the U.S. Olympic Committee to address that. I will tell you, Dana, that the president made a very clear decision about not sending a diplomatic delegation. Obviously, that wasn't for security purposes. That was sending a clear message about human rights and our concerns about the treatment of Uyghurs. However, we work closely with the U.S. Olympic Committee. The athletes are going. The president's looking forward to cheering. I'm a bit Olympics obsessed myself, and I'm looking forward to cheering for them as well from home.
We hope they stay safe along the way. They've been told to bring burner phones.
I mean,
it's an extraordinary thing. The world's going to be watching this country. We still don't have answers on COVID. The president yesterday said he brought this up with President Xi. How firmly?
The president never holds back, and he's always firm in his conversations. I can promise you that, including with President Xi, who he's known for a long time. He's had a lot of deep, direct conversations with.
My last question for you, Jen. I have a lot of empathy on the press side of things. I always feel like I can be in the room and think what you're thinking. When the president looks at his watch and says, I guess I'll go another 24 minutes. I'm curious what your exact heart rate was at that time.
I'm a pretty chill person in general. I may not always seem that way in the briefing room, but I will say I watched and I knew he was having a good time. He actually likes engaging with reporters. As you all know, he was on the Hill for 36 years as a member of the Senate. And in Congress, members wander around and reporters just come up and ask them questions, and that's what he's used to. So
Jen,
I knew he was having a good time.
Well, I was having a heart attack for you.
Listen, the build-up for this press conference went a total of 5 days, because that's how soon you announced it. And if he likes that give and take, we would encourage him to join us.
Love to have
we would encourage him to join the White House press corps more often than just yesterday. But thank you so much.
Let me tell you, though, Bill, he's answered questions 250 times in the last year to the White House press corps, but I will see him shortly, and I will pass on your invitation.
Thank you for that, and thank you for being here today. Please come back. We'll do it more often.
Good luck to the Bengals, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
I don't know how well they take that in Nashville, but we'll see about that with the Titans this weekend.